Hey there, Eli again, coming at you from the Coral Room of Coventry here today with another episode of What is a Coral? However, today I'm not really talking about corals. I would like to talk a little bit about bubble tip anemones, which are a close cousin, but share very many similar characteristics to their coral cousins. So, in front of me here I have a rock that's loaded with what we call rainbow bubble tip anemones because they have so many colors. These are a species of Entacmia quadricolor, which is the bubble tip anemone, which comes in a bunch of different varieties in the aquarium. So these are what we call rainbow bubble tip, but you see them in shades of green, or you might see very high-end anemones like black widow anemones, your sunburst anemones, and some of these other different morphs, which basically just differ in their color patterns. However, these are all that same individual species, which is the bubble tip anemone. Bubble tip anemones are a great addition to a lot of mixed reef aquariums, or even some aquariums that you don't want a ton of maintenance in. Oftentimes, the bubble tips can be a little bit invasive if given the chance to do so. They have a very potent sting, and they do interact with other corals chemically and will attempt to kill any other corals in the tank, so they can be quite a vicious competitor when it comes to the aquarium setting. That being said, keeping these guys in a tank where they have a little bit of room to spread without touching other corals, and a tank that you do frequent water changes and add carbon to your filtration to kind of remove any chemicals from the tank, these can be a really rewarding aquarium creature to keep. Not only are these guys really beautiful, but they come in all those different shades of color and are not typically very difficult to care for. Generally, these anemones want a high amount of light, and they will tolerate a moderate to high amount of flow as well. So generally placing them somewhere to the mid or upper water column is most appropriate for these anemones. Unlike corals, which are truly sessile and will stay attached to the substrate on which they grow on, anemones are actually able to attach and disattach their foot from the substrate at their own will. So that is one of the big differences that differentiates an anemone from a coral, is that these anemones don't actually permanently attach to the structure that they're on, and they're able to disattach their foot from the substrate to move around if they desire to do so. So that is one thing to keep in mind with bubble tips if you do plan on keeping them in your aquarium. When you first introduce a bubble tip, generally turning the flow off for 30 or 45 minutes after you add this anemone to your tank is the most important to give it a fighting chance at actually grabbing onto the rockwork. And then by the time that you turn the pumps back on, it should be sufficiently adhered to the substrate so that it doesn't blow around the tank by the pumps. That being said, if the anemone itself decides that it no longer wants to be in that spot, it is quite common for them to loosen their footing and allow the current to blow them around the tank until they find a spot that's a little more suitable for themselves. It's definitely important to make sure that you budget enough space for the anemones when you add them to the tank. And they can also be quite prolific when it comes to splitting. They do clone themselves by just splitting directly down the middle. So generally a single anemone, if given the proper care over time, will split multiple times and allow you the chance at more anemones down the road. Generally, these are not considered a beginner-friendly organism, and that's mostly because they tend to be sensitive when it comes to newer tanks. I would say any tank that's been set up for 6 months plus, somewhere in that realm, something that's got a good amount of biological buildup, some good bacterial colonies going on, is going to be sufficient to keep these. And as long as you have sufficient lighting, stable parameters in terms of salinity, alkalinity, calcium, these guys should thrive pretty well for you. Anemones are something that can be spot fed. They will accept foods from anything small as brine and mysis shrimp to larger ones taking silversides, mussels, some of these other things. And it is heard of on occasion for anemones to eat fish. However, in my experience, that's generally that they would catch a fish that's already weakened or something that has already died in the tank, and they might just be lucky enough to have consumed it. One of everybody's favorite thing about the bubble tip anemones is their ability to host clownfish, and just about any of your bubble tips would be appropriate if this is something that you desired to get into. So a lot of people know, especially from just popular culture, that anemones of different species will host clownfish. In the wild, pairs of clownfish will set up shop in a small anemone, and they basically get some coverage by this anemone, a little bit of protection offered to them, and the clownfish are generally not sensitive to the sting of the anemone. And the clownfish also benefit the anemone by offering it some protection from things that would like to prey upon it. And they also allow for a little bit more water flow around the anemone. and a little bit of a food exchange. So it is kind of a mutual symbiosis between the both animals where they both receive some benefits out of this. That being said, a lot of clownfish that you see in the hobby are captive bred. And if you desire to do this in your aquarium, adding a clownfish and an anemone to your tank might be the first time that that clownfish has ever encountered an anemone. So oftentimes it might take a long while, a few weeks, a few months for the clownfish to even become comfortable enough with entering that anemone. And if they do desire to do so, they oftentimes will have to kind of build up a defense against the stings of the anemone. So they are a little bit sensitive to it those first couple times that they do rub against the anemone. But generally, once they have figured it out that that anemone is an option for them to live within, they will secrete a thicker slime coat and they become a little more tolerant of the sting of the anemone. And oftentimes, once they've staked claim to an anemone, it is very hard to get those clownfish to move anywhere else in the tank. So it's just a really interesting relationship to view in an aquarium. And one of the reasons that a lot of people really get into the aquarium hobby, especially the saltwater reef aquarium, is just seeing those neat sort of interactions like that. Thank you guys as always for watching. I hope you enjoyed my spotlight on the bubble tip anemone. As much as it is not a coral, I felt that it was fitting for the What is a Coral series. Thank you guys all for watching. Let us know in the comment section below if you have questions, suggestions for future videos. And as always, keep on reefing.